The colonel laughed at her weakness, but in seconds, the sound of breaking steel silenced the entire base, made grown Marines question everything they believed about strength, and turned the most underestimated woman in the military into a legend that would haunt their nightmares forever. The merciless desert heat shimmered across Camp Liberty's training grounds, where Lieutenant Sarah Angel Chen had endured 14 months of relentless mockery from hardened Marines who viewed her medical corps insignia as proof she belonged in a civilian hospital rather than among America's most battle-tested warriors. The derision came in waves, during field exercises where she struggled with equipment clearly designed for larger frames, through combat demonstrations where her obvious reluctance to engage in physical confrontations marked her as fundamentally unsuited for military life, and especially during the cruel betting pools that Marines organized whenever she attempted physical challenges that seemed beyond her delicate 5 feet 2 inches frame. Before we reveal how one moment of snapping steel changed everything these warriors believed about power, tell us in the comments which country you're watching from today. And if you know that the most dangerous people are those who choose silence until the perfect moment to strike, hit that subscribe button to join our community. What you're about to witness will redefine everything you think you know about strength. There's our porcelain doll, Colonel Marcus Iron Steel would announce whenever she approached their training areas, his gravelly voice carrying enough contempt to ensure every Marine within earshot could participate in the ritual humiliation that had become Lieutenant Chen's daily reality. They watched her fumble with weapons that appeared too heavy for her small hands, snickered when she seemed overwhelmed by displays of raw physical power that were second nature to battle-hardened Marines, and treated her presence like a diversity quota imposed by politically correct Pentagon bureaucrats who had never experienced real combat. What they couldn't have imagined, what their institutional arrogance had completely blinded them to, was that the woman they dismissed as the weakest link in their chain possessed physical capabilities that made their elite training look like children's playground games, and that when their commanding officer finally pushed her too far, she would demonstrate why her previous assignments had been classified at levels that made their combat records look like basic training certificates. They only knew her as Lieutenant Sarah Chen, the Navy medical officer assigned to provide healthcare support for the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Unit's Advanced Combat Readiness Training at their desert facility in California. 14 months into what should have been routine medical oversight, she had become the unit's unofficial symbol of military weakness, living proof that modern military policies forced elite combat units to accommodate personnel who clearly lacked the physical strength required for successful operations in hostile environments. But Lieutenant Sarah Chen represented something that challenged Steele's fundamental understanding of military effectiveness. At exactly 5 feet 2 inches and barely 115 pounds soaking wet, she moved through the base like a living contradiction to everything he'd spent 32 years proving. Her medical uniform hung loose on her small frame. Her equipment seemed too heavy for her delicate hands, and when she attempted physical training exercises, she looked like a child playing dress-up in adult military gear. What drove Steele to absolute fury wasn't just her apparent weakness. It was her complete indifference to his strength-based culture. While other personnel sought his approval through displays of physical prowess, Lieutenant Chen treated his legendary capabilities with the same professional courtesy she'd show a janitor. She didn't seem impressed by his deadlifting records, intimidated by his combat stories, or motivated to prove she belonged in his world of calculated violence and measured aggression. To Colonel Marcus Iron Steel, a man whose nickname came from both his towering 6 feet 4 inches frame and his unshakable philosophy that Marines were forged through pure physical dominance, Lieutenant Chen represented everything that was destroying American military supremacy. Here was a commanding officer who didn't just deadlift 500 pounds, he did it while lecturing recruits about the sacred nature of strength. His office walls displayed a testament to physical capability. Photos of him carrying wounded Marines through hostile territory, performing sandbag and litter carries under enemy fire, and leading evacuation operations that required superhuman endurance in combat conditions. Steele's entire worldview revolved around a single, unbreakable truth. In the crucible of combat, the strongest survive and the weak become casualties. Every training protocol, every evaluation standard, Every decision he made was filtered through this ironclad belief that superior physical capability was not just important. It was the only thing that mattered when American lives hung in the balance. The medical officer provides adequate clinical support, Steele had mentioned to his senior staff during weekly assessment meetings, but her obvious physical limitations create distractions that undermine the strength-based culture we need to develop effective Marines. Combat effectiveness requires understanding that warfare isn't clinical. It's physical, brutal, and absolutely dependent on superior strength when American Marines face enemies who want to test our physical resolve. Sergeant Major Carlos "Bulldozer" Rodriguez, who served as Steele's senior enlisted advisor and possessed extensive experience integrating support personnel into Marine training environments, offered perspective based on his observations during Lieutenant Chen's extended assignment to their facility. Colonel, her medical competence has been exceptional. Trauma response is flawless. Battlefield medicine knowledge comprehensive, Rodriguez replied while reviewing metrics. Her understanding of combat injuries exceeds most personnel we've encountered. Steele's concerns extended beyond medical competence to fundamental questions about Chen's physical compatibility with Marine strength culture. Rodriguez, medical skills become irrelevant without physical strength, Steele explained studying reports. Chen observes our operations like academic research instead of understanding we're preparing Marines to physically overpower enemies through superior conditioning. The Marines participating in advanced combat training had developed their collective assessment of Lieutenant Chen based on 14 months of daily interaction and careful observation of her reactions to their physically demanding preparation for the world's most challenging military assignments. Gunnery Sergeant Roberto "Tank" Martinez, himself a 240-pound powerhouse who'd once lifted a damaged Humvee off a trapped Marine, had become the unofficial spokesman for what every Marine was thinking but afraid to say directly to leadership. Doc Chen handles medical procedures competently, Martinez commented to fellow Marines, but she doesn't understand what makes Marine operations different. Williams offered perspective. Some medical officers focus on healthcare without embracing physical culture. Doesn't mean they can't function when situations get demanding. This reflected prevailing opinion. Chen's professional distance suggested incompatibility with operations where physical superiority determined survival. Williams' effective Marine medical support requires understanding the warrior mentality that keeps American Marines alive through superior physical capability in environments where enemies specifically target medical personnel for physical elimination. Martinez replied with confidence derived from extensive combat experience and validation from Marines who'd proven their physical effectiveness under the most demanding operational conditions. Doc Chen treats physical training like it's incompatible with medical ethics instead of recognizing that physical dominance protects the people she's supposed to support medically when situations require raw strength. The confrontation that would shatter every assumption began on a scorching Tuesday morning when Colonel Steele decided that Lieutenant Chen's presence had become more than just embarrassing. It had become dangerous to Marine morale and operational readiness. The assessment was specifically designed to evaluate individual physical capacity, strength endurance, and psychological resilience during scenarios where superior physical capability determined mission success and personnel survival in hostile environments. Lieutenant Chen was scheduled to provide medical oversight from the training area perimeter, positioned where she could monitor the physical assessment while remaining available for immediate medical response if training injuries occurred during the demanding strength evaluations that characterized advanced Marine preparation. But the assessment became something far more personal when Colonel Steele decided that Lieutenant Chen's obvious physical limitations required public demonstration to reinforce the importance of superior strength in Marine culture and operational effectiveness. The confrontation began when Colonel Steele approached Lieutenant Chen's medical station carrying his personal M4 carbine, a weapon he had carried through multiple combat deployments, and that had become a symbol of his physical dominance and tactical effectiveness. Lieutenant Chen, Colonel Steele announced, his voice carrying across the training ground like a judge pronouncing sentence. I think it's time we settled this question about physical standards once and for all. This weapon, he held up his personal M4 carbine, a battle-scarred weapon that had seen 3 combat deployments, represents everything a Marine must master. weight, balance, mechanical precision. Things that require real strength. The gathered Marines formed a tight circle, sensing blood in the water. This wasn't just another training demonstration. This was an execution. Colonel Steele was about to prove, publicly and definitively, that Lieutenant Chen had no business among warriors. I want you to show these Marines basic weapon handling, Steele continued, his tone making it clear this was a challenge, not a request. Let's see if those delicate medical hands can manage a real weapon. Lieutenant Chen walked forward with the same measured pace she used approaching wounded personnel, her dark eyes revealing nothing of what she was thinking. As she accepted the weapon with both small hands, every Marine present felt vindicated in their assumptions. The M4 looked absurdly oversized in her grip, confirming 14 months of mockery and professional dismissal. But then something shifted. Her fingers found positions on the weapon that seemed impossibly precise. Her stance adjusted into something that looked less like a medical officer holding unfamiliar equipment and more like a predator examining prey. When she spoke, her voice carried an undertone that made several combat veterans instinctively step backward. "Colonel Steele," she said with clinical detachment, "this weapon exhibits some concerning structural characteristics that could compromise operational integrity under stress conditions." What happened in the next 5 seconds would be replayed in slow motion in every Marine's memory for the remainder of their military careers, analyzed in official incident reports, and whispered about in barracks conversations for decades to come. Lieutenant Chen's grip tightened with mechanical precision, and the unmistakable sound of aircraft-grade aluminum being stressed beyond engineering limits echoed across the desert training ground like a death knell for everything these Marines had believed about strength, capability, and the fundamental nature of power itself. The crack that followed wasn't just a sound. It was the destruction of an entire belief system, echoing across the training ground like thunder announcing the end of certainty itself. Lieutenant Chen had snapped Colonel Steele's personal M4 carbine cleanly in half. What looked like it violated the laws of physics unfolded before 40 witnesses. The upper and lower receivers separated with such violence that metal fragments ricocheted off nearby equipment, the weapon's internal mechanisms spilling across the sand like mechanical entrails. Armorers would later discover microfractures in the receiver. Desert heat cycles and sand infiltration had compromised the metal's integrity over multiple deployments. But what Lieutenant Chen accomplished went far beyond exploiting existing weaknesses. She had identified and exploited structural vulnerabilities that no conventional assessment could have detected. Colonel Steele stared at the destroyed weapon with growing awareness that his demonstration had revealed something far beyond what he'd intended to prove. The humbling realization that he'd completely misjudged one of his own personnel began replacing his initial shock. "Lieutenant Chen," he said carefully, his voice carrying genuine curiosity rather than confrontation, "that level of precision. In identifying structural weaknesses, where did you develop that kind of technical knowledge?" Lieutenant Chen handed him the destroyed weapon with the same gentle courtesy she used when passing medical instruments during surgery, her breathing completely normal, her expression betraying absolutely no awareness that she had just accomplished something physically impossible. "I'm afraid your weapon experienced catastrophic structural failure, Colonel," she said with clinical detachment. "I'd strongly recommend having your armory inspect the remaining inventory for similar metallurgical weaknesses before they compromise operational safety." The silence that followed was more than absence of sound. It was the death of certainty, the collapse of everything these warriors had built their identities around. Colonel Steele, a man who had never shown weakness in 3 decades of military service, stood trembling as he held the pieces of his destroyed weapon, his face cycling through disbelief, shock, and something approaching existential terror. That's impossible," he whispered, his command voice reduced to the confused stammering of a child whose understanding of reality had just been shattered. "Lieutenant Chen, what? How did you? Where did you learn?" Lieutenant Chen was already turning back to organize her medical supplies, moving with the same calm efficiency she displayed every single day for 14 months, as if destroying military hardware with her bare hands was as routine as checking blood pressure or updating medical records. Previous assignments required certain operational adaptations, Colonel, she replied without looking up from her equipment. Sometimes medical personnel operate in environments where conventional equipment limitations become tactically inconvenient, and standard protocols prove insufficient for mission accomplishment and personnel survival. Martinez was the first Marine to find his voice, though it emerged as barely more than a strangled whisper. "Ma'am, what kind of medical assignments?" Lieutenant Chen paused in her supply organization, and for the first time in 14 months, these Marines witnessed something they'd never seen before. Lieutenant Sarah Chen smiled. But this wasn't the polite, professional expression they'd grown accustomed to. This was the smile of an apex predator who'd spent over a year playing the role of prey and had finally decided the game was over. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying an authority that made every Marine present unconsciously snap to attention. "For 6 years, I provided medical support for units that officially don't exist, in locations that aren't on any map, for operations that never happened according to any government record you'll ever see." She reached into her medical bag and withdrew what appeared to be a standard military challenge coin. But as she held it up in the desert sunlight, the Marines could see it had been twisted into an impossible spiral, solid metal shaped by nothing but human grip strength into a geometric impossibility. "This coin belonged to my first team leader at a classified facility near Fort Bragg," she continued conversationally. "He was a Green Beret who'd spent 8 years in special operations, and he wanted to test the weak little Navy nurse they'd assigned to his unit. He bet me $50 I couldn't open a pickle jar in the team room." She tossed the twisted metal to Martinez, who caught it reflexively and immediately dropped it, as if it were molten steel, the impossibly deformed challenge coin clattering across the sand like evidence of witchcraft. I opened the jar. Then I opened 3 more. Then I twisted his challenge coin into modern art while he watched, just to make sure we understood each other's capabilities and limitations. Colonel Steele was staring at Lieutenant Chen with the expression of a man whose entire worldview had been obliterated and rebuilt in the span of 60 seconds, his legendary composure completely shattered by the realization of what had been walking among them for over a year. "Lieutenant," he said with the careful tone of someone addressing a live explosive device, "exactly which units did you serve with? What kind of operations required medical personnel to develop physical capabilities that exceed military equipment specifications?" Her smile widened, revealing secrets that were classified beyond the security clearances of everyone present. And suddenly, every Marine understood why certain military service records were locked behind classifications that mere mortals would never be authorized to access. "Let's just say, Colonel, that when Delta Force operators and Navy SEAL Team 6 personnel get severely injured in locations that don't officially exist, someone has to extract them from hostile territory while under enemy fire. And when that someone is a 5 feet 2 inches Navy nurse facing insurgents who outweigh her by 100 pounds, she'd better be capable of deadlifting 350 pounds while performing trauma surgery, or those operators don't come home." She gestured casually toward the destroyed weapon in his trembling hands, as if the impossible feat they'd just witnessed was merely a parlor trick compared to her actual capabilities. "Breaking things is actually the easy part of my job, Colonel. The challenging part is putting broken people back together while someone's actively trying to kill you, then carrying those people to safety when conventional extraction isn't possible, and failure means American operators disappear forever in places their families will never know they died." The implications of her revelation hit the assembled Marines like a physical assault, each word reshaping their understanding of the woman they'd spent 14 months tormenting with petty cruelties and professional dismissal. They'd been sharing their base with someone whose classified service record probably read like a collection of impossible missions, someone who'd carried wounded Tier 1 operators out of combat zones so secret they didn't appear on any military database, who'd performed surgery under conditions that would psychologically destroy most trained killers. Colonel Steele carefully placed the destroyed weapon on a nearby equipment table, his hands visibly shaking as the full scope of his misjudgment became clear. When he looked back at Lieutenant Chen, his expression had undergone complete transformation from condescending superiority to something approaching religious awe. "Lieutenant Chen," he said, his voice carrying the profound respect of one warrior finally recognizing another, "I owe you more than an apology. I owe you an acknowledgement that I've spent 30 years believing I understood the nature of strength, and I was completely, catastrophically wrong. He turned to address the circle of stunned Marines, his command voice carrying clearly across the training ground, but now tempered with humility that none of them had ever heard before. Marines, what you just witnessed represents why we never judge operational capability by appearances or conventional assumptions. Lieutenant Chen possesses more classified combat experience than most of us will accumulate in entire careers, and physical capabilities that exceed anything we've achieved through traditional training methodologies. He paused, looking directly at the woman they'd dismissed for over a year. From this moment forward, anyone who shows disrespect to our medical officer will answer directly to me. And after what we've all witnessed today, I strongly recommend you'd rather face disciplinary action from me than discover what else Lieutenant Chen is capable of when properly motivated. Lieutenant Chen's response revealed specialized military experience that exceeded Steele's understanding of medical officer career progression and the scope of physical training available through military professional development systems. Colonel Steele, I served as a medical officer with units conducting operations where medical personnel were required to function in extreme physical environments where healthcare delivery demanded strength capabilities that exceeded conventional medical training, because patient survival required physical solutions that traditional medicine couldn't provide, she replied. Medical responsibilities included trauma care under hostile conditions, but operational requirements also demanded physical capabilities for patient extraction, equipment manipulation, and independent operation when conventional support wasn't available or physically possible. Over the following weeks, Lieutenant Chen's complete background was gradually revealed through official military channels, and her willingness to discuss operational experience that had previously been classified at security levels, preventing detailed explanation to personnel lacking appropriate clearances and operational need-to-know requirements. She had served with Army Special Forces medical detachments conducting operations in extreme environments where medical personnel were trained as physical specialists because their missions required functioning in conditions where conventional medicine wasn't possible and medical officers needed capabilities that exceeded traditional healthcare roles. Her conditioning training had been conducted at specialized military facilities that provided instruction to personnel operating in environments where physical capability could determine patient survival, mission success, and strategic objectives that affected broader military operations and national security interests. The operations I supported required medical personnel who could function as physical specialists while maintaining medical expertise and healthcare responsibilities, Lieutenant Chen explained during comprehensive briefings with Steele and facility leadership about her background and potential contributions to training effectiveness. The physical training programs at the facility were significantly enhanced through integration of Lieutenant Chen's specialized knowledge and advanced conditioning techniques that exceeded what was available through standard Marine Corps training resources and conventional instruction methodologies. Her conditioning methods provided instruction in sophisticated strength development techniques that enabled all personnel to achieve physical performance that exceeded conventional expectations through scientific training approaches and biomechanical optimization rather than relying solely on traditional strength training or conventional conditioning methods. Martinez, whose initial skepticism about Lieutenant Chen had been completely eliminated through witnessing physical capabilities that exceeded his strength training experience and conditioning background, became one of her most dedicated students and strongest advocates for expanded physical training integration throughout Marine Corps commands. Lieutenant Chen demonstrated that exceptional physical capability often conceals itself behind professional medical roles that don't reveal the full extent of someone's conditioning background and specialized training. Martinez would later explain to new Marines during advanced strength instruction sessions. Williams, whose respect for diverse approaches to military conditioning had been validated in ways that exceeded his previous understanding, found his comprehension of human physical potential completely transformed through exposure to Lieutenant Chen's integrated approach to medicine and extreme physical conditioning under demanding operational conditions. Steele, whose professional assessment of Lieutenant Chen had undergone complete transformation, became one of her strongest supporters for expanded conditioning responsibilities and recognition throughout Marine Corps leadership structures and physical training programs. The conditioning techniques that Lieutenant Chen shared were eventually adopted throughout Marine Corps commands, establishing enhanced standards for physical capability that improved operational effectiveness for personnel worldwide and revolutionized strength assessment protocols at military installations. Her methods proved that superior conditioning knowledge and biomechanical precision could enable personnel to achieve physical performance that exceeded conventional limitations, providing all Marines with capabilities they had never believed possible through standard training approaches and traditional conditioning methodologies. But perhaps Lieutenant Chen's most important contribution was demonstrating that assumptions based on physical appearance, apparent strength limitations, and observable behavior patterns could be completely incorrect, and that exceptional physical capability often chooses professional competence over strength display until circumstances require immediate demonstration of advanced conditioning and biomechanical expertise. The story of the medical officer who snapped a rifle in half became legendary throughout Marine Corps training commands, shared with new Marines as definitive proof that exceptional physical capability often conceals itself behind professional medical roles that don't reveal the full scope of conditioning background and specialized strength training. The most important lesson from Lieutenant Chen's strength demonstration, instructors would tell new candidates during advanced physical training, is that physical capability is determined by results rather than appearances, and that the people who appear least suited for strength-based operations might possess the most advanced conditioning you'll encounter in military service. Years later, when Lieutenant Chen was promoted to senior leadership positions in Special Operations Medical Command, her legacy continued through conditioning programs that integrated medical knowledge with advanced strength techniques, and through enhanced assessment protocols that prevented discrimination based on assumptions about personnel physical suitability and conditioning capabilities. Her story reminded everyone in the Marine Corps that medical personnel must maintain readiness for extreme physical responsibilities that far exceed traditional healthcare roles, and that the most effective military medical officers are often those whose conditioning rivals or exceeds that of personnel whose primary military occupational specialty involves direct combat operations and physical mission accomplishment. The moment when Lieutenant Chen had demonstrated impossible strength had lasted only seconds, but its impact on Marine Corps training, physical assessment protocols, and conditioning effectiveness continued for decades, reminding everyone that exceptional capability often chooses modesty over demonstration until circumstances demand immediate proof of advanced skills and physical competence. The confrontation that could have resulted in continued harassment and professional marginalization had instead revealed physical expertise that enhanced the conditioning capabilities and operational effectiveness of an entire training facility, proving that sometimes the most valuable discoveries come from witnessing people demonstrate abilities that completely contradict our assumptions about their background and specialized capabilities. Before we leave you with this incredible story that challenges everything you believe about strength and capability, here's our final question. Have you ever completely misjudged someone's abilities based on their appearance and been shocked by what they were actually capable of? Have you witnessed those moments where the quietest person in the room turned out to be the most dangerous? Share your most dramatic stories in the comments below. We want to hear about times when your assumptions about people proved spectacularly, dangerously wrong. And if this story taught you that the most lethal people are often those who look the most harmless, that real strength reveals itself only when lives depend on it, and that underestimating the wrong person can shatter your entire understanding of reality, hit that subscribe button and activate notifications. Every story we share reminds us that extraordinary people walk among us in disguise, waiting for the perfect moment to prove that everything we thought we knew about power and capability was completely wrong. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the hidden world of true strength. Remember, the person you dismiss today as weak might be the one carrying secrets that could save or destroy you tomorrow. We'll see you in the next story, where we'll uncover another incredible tale of hidden power and the moment when the underestimated become unstoppable.